Federal judge in the District of Columbia in a scathing new order has looked the Trump administration in the eye and said, I don't believe you. And I'm going to continue to block your ability to cut off trillions of dollars of federal aid to not-for-profits and state programs around the country on 24 hours notice, not on my watch. And she said in her order, which I'm going to read aspects of it to you, she said, effectively, I don't believe this administration. The continuing harm is happening. I'm going to stop it right now. And in addition to it, she said that in order for the Trump administration to have gotten over the hurdle to avoid the preliminary injunction, they would have had to show fundamentally that their actions were reasonable. And the judge went on to say that their actions to cut off without consideration of the impact on hundreds of millions of people in America with an overnight cessation of funding is the very definition of unreasonable. You know what's not unreasonable? You being here on Legal AF, the YouTube channel, and with me, Michael Popok. Let's dive into Judge Ali Khan, who did not hold back a Biden appointee, for those that are scoring at home, in the D.C. Trial court level, D.C. District Court. And we have a 29-page order. I don't have the preliminary injunction yet, but it will match what she ruled on here. Let me read to you from the part that'll just give you the idea of how scorching this was. And this is judge speak. It's very diplomatic and polite. I'll convert it into true vernacular, having practiced federal law for over 35 years in these same courts. On page 29 over to 30, the judge said the arbitrary and capricious review at this stage of the litigation remains largely unchanged. The touchstone of the inquiry about the decision that this agency made through the Office of Management and Budget is rationality. Every action that a government agency has to take in compliance with an executive order or not has to be rational. If it's not rational, the opposite of rational in my world is arbitrary and capricious, which is a term of art, which means your action is going down in flames in front of a court. The judge said the touchstone of the inquiry is rationality. Defendants, that's the Trump administration, still, to this day, cannot provide a reasonable explanation for why they needed to freeze all federal financial assistance in less than a day to safeguard valuable taxpayer resources. The potential $3 trillion in financial assistance implicated by the freeze is breathtakingly large sum of money to suspend practically overnight. And rather than taking a measured approach to identify purportedly wasteful spending, defendants cut the fuel supply to a vast, complicated nationwide machine, seemingly without any consideration for the consequences of that decision. In other words, doing so was not and could never be rational, Judge Ali Khan continued, especially when the decision was made without grappling with its catastrophic effects or the logistical nightmare of its implementation. You know who deals with catastrophic effects and nightmares of implementation? Federal judges. That's why they enter, in this case, a preliminary injunction. Quick tutorial. There's basically 3 types of injunctions or stays in a federal court. The lowest level is an administrative stay. That's usually for hours, maybe a day. So the judge can kind of get everybody together, get the briefing in, and get into a hearing. But it is a stay. The next level up, temporary restraining order. Very similar to a preliminary injunction, but lasts for a shorter amount of time. You still have to satisfy the 4 elements of a injunction or temporary restraining order that you're likely to win. That's called likelihood of success on the merits. Judge peeks under the hood, says, yeah, I see the cases, I see the case law, I see the facts, you're likely to win down the road. That's 1. 2 is you are currently being irreparably harmed, and if we don't enjoin this bad conduct, then we can never give you money to compensate you. In other words, all of these not-for-profits and all of these state agencies that are going to go out of business, and then people that are beneficiaries and recipients of this money who aren't going to be able to, who are going to lose their housing, their homes, their food, their shelter, that kind of thing, their schooling. I can't fix that as a federal judge. That is the sine qua non of being irreparable harm. Similarly, inadequate remedy at law, meaning money damages can't help you. And the balance of equities and public justice points in your favor. Those are the factors in federal court. Preliminary injunction, temporary restraining order, the same, except the preliminary injunction order lasts for a longer period of time and is generally the last order that can be appealed. That's where we're at. Every time you hear a new preliminary injunction has been issued against this administration or a new temporary restraining order, that means a judge has found that it is more likely than not that the party that's moving against the Trump administration will prevail ultimately in the case. That's how you read it. Okay? So here, they all ran to two places. The states and the not-for-profits kind of ran to two separate places. The states ran to Rhode Island and got Judge McConnell. The not-for-profits ran to D.C. and they got Judge Ali Khan. Both of them have issued now preliminary injunctions, having previously issued temporary restraining orders to stop the Office of Management and Budget, run by Russ Vought, who is the architect and the self-proclaimed father of Project 2025, from continuing to cut off funding. That's what it means. Whether it's through the Trump administration, the agencies, the agency heads, any kind of guidance, indirectly or directly. See, judges have to cast a wide net when they issue an order because you get a Trump administration and they're always trying to find a way not to comply, right? And the judge is onto them. In fact, she called them out for trying to not comply at all. On page 16 over to 17, she said, well, you told me that you rescinded the direction to cut off the funding, but then the press secretary Carolyn Leavitt took to her social media and said, it's nothing of the kind, that the rescission of the memo does not rescind the underlying presidential executive order cutting off the funding. So I don't trust you, Trump administration. And the court goes on to say that on the bottom of 16 over 17, rescinding the OMB pause memo did not moot the case because defendants could not and still cannot show that they will not resume the challenge activity. As the court previously observed, the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, appeared to completely contradict the act of rescission by expressly stating that it was not a rescission of the federal funding freeze. By any reading of the press secretary's remarks, the memorandum's retraction was an empty gesture. At best, it was meaningless. At worst, it was a brazen attempt, Judge Khan said, Ali Khan said, to deprive the court of jurisdiction without actually altering course. That means you're trying to act like you comply with my order, but you didn't. So the court goes on the bottom of top of page 17, because plaintiffs' members were still being frozen out of their funding in the wake of the purported rescission, it appears that the Office of Management and Budget sought to overcome a judicially imposed obstacle without ceasing the challenged conduct. That's a very polite way of saying you try to do an end run around my broad federal order, and I don't like it. And the next time you do something like that, now that's me portraying Judge Ali Khan, you're going to be found in contempt. And I'm going to call all of the cabinet members and Russ Vought by name to show up in my courtroom and tell me why they're not complying. In other words, if you touch one more hair on the funding head of any more not-for-profits or any states with my preliminary injunction in place or the one by Judge McConnell in Rhode Island, you're going to have hell to pay. That's where we are now, with federal courts looking the Trump administration in the eye and not blinking and giving them the 1,000-yard stare they deserve. You want to play with fire? Play with me. I'm a lifetime appointed Article 3 federal judge. You don't like it? We'll find out who wins this war. And that's where we got now. This reminds me of the civil rights movement during the 1960s when the southern states wanted to refuse federal judges' orders. And it took the will of, at the time, JFK and his brother RFK. Oh, remember those FKs? I love that group. Not the current batch that's in the Trump administration, but the original, the OGs. They sent in the National Guard to enforce federal law. Now, we don't have that benefit right now, so we're going to have to see how federal judges use their inherent authority to enforce their laws. First thing you got to do is you got to lay down the law. That's why we're here reporting on these particular 29-page memorandum opinions, followed by the actual preliminary injunction. The preliminary injunction is going to be quite straightforward. It hasn't come out yet, but I'll give you the preview and then I'll do a hot take on it right here on Legal AF. It's going to be, you are preliminarily enjoined through the extent of these proceedings from indirectly or directly cutting off any funding whatsoever. In other words, you are mandated to turn all funding back on at every level of government until I say so, until this preliminary injunction is lifted. Now, once that's in place, that's the trigger for the Trump administration to take their appeal to the DC Court of Appeals. And I think they'll lose 3-0 or 2-1 on a 3-judge panel there. And then we're off to the United States Supreme Court. We'll follow it all, just like we're doing it now, together on Legal AF, the YouTube channel. Hit the free subscribe button and help us grow this pro-democracy channel together. So until my next reporting, I'm Michael Popok. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.